The scenery is unmistakably African, and so that can only mean that we're at the longest and toughest round of the World Rally Championship. For the last 3 years, the Safari Rally has been dominated by British drivers, with 2 wins for Colin McRae and 1 for Richard Burns. But as many drivers over the years will tell you, it doesn't matter how strong your car nor how good your preparation. In Kenya, luck has to be on your side.
And that's something Colin McRae has been rather short of recently, having failed to finish 9 of the last 10 events in his Ford Focus.
It's going to be tough this year. It's a bit rougher than last year, and I'm sure the pace is going to be even quicker again, so it's going to be interesting.
McRae's great British rival Richard Burns led this event last year until his Subaru succumbed to the conditions.
It's one of the most satisfying to get round. In one piece, the car in one piece, you get to the end of a section, you haven't any problems, then normally you have a good time. It's not so nice when you're actually in the car feeling the punishment that the car's taking, but that's part of the event, and that's why you've recce'd and made notes for all the rough and bad places.
4 times world champion Tommy Mäkinen was back in Africa, hoping for better luck than last year.
Can you win here in Kenya?
Well, our car feels very good. It feels much faster than last year. We have worked very hard with suspension, and we have found very good handling and good grip, and engine is running a bit better. Its car is a bit faster. Well, it feels good.
Marcus Gronholm and the Peugeot 206 were making their Safari debut.
Marcus, you won in Sweden. Can you win here in Kenya?
No, I don't think so. No. It's my first time here, and also with the car we are very late. We haven't tested here, so I think we have to go very slow and have a look if we can finish.
Alistair McRae was another taking his first look at the Safari, but his Hyundai wasn't even entered for the actual event. He was there just to do the recce in preparation for next year. Skoda were present though, with their 2 cars for Armin Schwartz and Lewis Clement. Simply finishing was their prime objective. While Seat had their regular pairing of Didier Auriol and Tony Gardemeister, whose car had only just been rebuilt in time after a big testing accident 2 days before the event.
Kenya's capital, Nairobi, was the base for the rally. The city's skyscrapers and never-ending traffic jams in sharp contrast to the huge empty plains which hosted the rally's 12 competitive sections. Leg 1 contained 4 of those sections to the south of Nairobi. The Mitsubishi Lancer of Tommy Mäkinen was first across the start ramp. The 1996 Safari winner came to Africa with a 6-point lead in this year's Drivers' Series after his win in Monte Carlo and 2nd place in Sweden. Kenya, though, is very different in character to any other rally. Competitive sections are run on open roads and can be the length of an entire day's competition on other events. Mäkinen and his co-driver Risto Manison-Maki were 2nd fastest on the opening section, but the next was a very different story. With their spotter helicopter in close attendance, the 2 Finns dragged the car out of the section on 3 wheels. Carlos Sainz's Ford Focus catching and passing them before the end. In all, Mäkinen's car had suffered 3 punctures on the section, but there were only 2 spare wheels. Driving on the flat had destroyed the tyre, which had then caused the suspension to break. To add insult to injury, the car resolutely refused to start at the finish control, and so Tommy and Risto became the 2000 Safari Rally's first victims.
We had still about 20 kilometers to go with 3 wheels. We did that, and we could come to the service, but I don't understand. Something else happened at the same time. It was like a empty flat battery or something, and engine just stopped suddenly, and we couldn't start it anymore.
Mäkinen told me before the start of the rally that the car was so good. He said, I'm going 210, 212 all the time, and suspension are so improved that I don't feel anything. Oh, poor tires, he said. He was right. So if we don't improve in parallel with the performances of the machines, somewhere something has to break. And for the time being, it's our tires, that's for sure.
Despite being cautious, 2 punctures left Marcus Gronholm in 15th place after the first section, but he would recover to 7th by the end of the day. Both Fords were to suffer badly with punctures as well. Sainz was fourth after section 2, but burst tyres led to broken suspension and he'd finished leg 1 back in 10th. Colin McRae fared slightly better, changing one wheel in a rapid 1.5 minutes and was the leading Michelin runner in 4th place after section 3, but he was already over 7.5 minutes behind the leader. As has been the case for the last 3 years, it was the blue Subarus that were setting the pace out at the front, with 3-time Safari winner Juha Kankkunen revelling in the reliability of his Pirellis, but still having to worry about the other hazards that the rally always presents.
Tightens and opens the flat right. Okay.
Incredibly, the damage to the Subaru was only superficial.
Just something like 40 kg or whatever it was. Hit the cows coming from the right and then went almost off the road because of trying to go around but couldn't, and then just hit. But luckily not really any main damage, just the strut was bent and then the wheel was open a little bit, but that's all.
Whilst the Japanese cars may have set the pace for most of the day, it was the Spanish upstart Seat and their new recruit Didier Auriol, also on Pirellis, who were quickest on stage 1 and led a World Championship event for the very first time.
Yeah, we are a little bit surprised. But this first stage was a long stage, of course, but quite smooth stage. So I have drive well, no sideways, and try to drive nicely. 25 on this case on the finish, I was some vibration on the left side, so I think okay, I slowed down a little bit, but we did a good time.
Auriol's teammate Tony Gardemeister was finding things were going from bad to worse. Losing the door on section 2 allowed dust into the car, making the crew feel even worse than they already were. Co-driver Paavo Lukander's neck, damaged in the testing accident, had taken another pounding, and so the team decided enough was enough.
I want to continue, but the doctor say now it's maybe better to stop now, because for mine and my co-driver neck is a little bit broken.
Lukander was now in serious pain, his bravery recognised by the Seat mechanics. But the rally now had a new leader. Richard Burns had been third fastest on the opening section, but stormed through the second to move ahead of Auriol. Burns and his co-driver Robert Reid then repeated that performance on the remaining 2 competitive sections, to return to Nairobi with a lead of nearly 4.5 minutes at the end of leg 1. Juha Kankkunen in the other Subaru Impreza would end the day in 2nd place. His encounter with the cows on section 1 hadn't caused any lasting damage, and Kankkunen had been 2nd fastest behind his teammate on both sections 2 and 3. 2nd quickest on the day's last section was the young Norwegian driver Petter Solberg, while Carlos Sainz almost had cause to regret asking Luis Moya to hold the wheel while he adjusted his belts.
Cuidado. Puta, avísame.
Carlos, si no pude, joder, los videos.
Pero grítame.
Pero si no me dio tiempo a avisarte, si me pongo un segundo, coño. Cuando te quise avisar ya estaba. Pues nada más acabo caliente el
Colin McRae was also in trouble. He limped into the day's last service area with a shattered front suspension. The Ford mechanics would have 45 minutes in which to repair the damage.
Come on. Here you go, boys. MPC pump as well. MPC pump. Okay.
McRae had done his bit by just getting the car there. Now it was their turn.
We had a damper broke in stage 3 towards the end, so obviously we had to drive through stage 4 with no front suspension on one side. Almost got to the end, but very close to the end there was I don't know what happened, maybe a bump or something, but the strut popped out the turret and came out through the wing. So, and obviously you can see the damage when we got here, so we had to drive it down the road like that.
Are you pleased just to get to the end of today?
You could say that, yeah. It's been a bit eventful.
3/4 of an hour later, the Focus left, looking a lot better than it had when it arrived.
If Gronholm thought he'd had problems with his Peugeot, they were nothing compared to those of his teammate Gilles Panizzi, who dropped back nearly 30 minutes with broken suspension on the very first section and then broke it again when he clobbered a rock. Blinded by the dust of the slower cars, he was now having to overtake. Unable to pass, he stopped to change the rear punctured tyre, but he wasn't a happy man.
The driver before, he's not sport.
Why?
Because I remount him,
And the helicopter, my helicopter, say to him, stop, he don't stop. And me, paf! Just limit. And I have a 2 puncture. Not possible. No.
At the end of the section, Gilles decided to take the matter into his own hands, and his assault on Argentinian Roberto Sanchez brought him the maximum fine permitted under the rules.
Marshals took a quite wise decision. I think it's normal that somebody doing this type of things should be penalized and not his team. So Gilles will have to pay $50,000. It's a big amount of money, but I think that in a way he deserves it.
For Richard Burns, there were no such problems.
And I said before the rally that if I was setting fastest times, then probably I'm going a little bit too fast, but because you can win this event without setting any fastest times as long as you get through everything cleanly, and that's my plan. I don't want to go in and set the quickest times. I just want to get to the end, and if we can do that, everybody else at the moment is chasing, and it'll take a lot to get that time back off me if I don't have the trouble, so that's what I've got to think about.
By the end of the day, Subarus dominated the leaderboard, with privateer Toshihiro Arai making it 3 Imprezas in the top 6, while Solberg now led the Ford Challenge.
Richard Burns led the cruise away from Nairobi at 4:45 this morning, well before dawn, for the 120-mile drive down into the Great Rift Valley and the first of today's 4 competitive sections. Leg 2 of the Safari Rally is unique within the World Rally Championship in that it has stages in both northern and southern hemispheres. Not that that'll make much difference to Burns, McRae and the rest. If that long drive from Nairobi hasn't woken them up, the day's first competitive section certainly will. That first section at around 75 miles was the longest of the entire event, with the day's other 3 totalling another 135. Leg 2 would be a real test of both car and driver. The Rift Valley also played a part. Much lower than the area around Nairobi, Leg 2 sections would be much hotter, with temperatures nudging 40 degrees during the afternoon. The conditions obviously didn't seem to bother Richard Burns, who set the fastest time on that long opening section. The Subaru driver now led by just over 5 minutes, having been quickest on 4 of the first 5 sections. The team's domination of the event was continuing, with Juha Kankkunen again setting the second fastest time on Section 5. Kankkunen and Juha Repo, like their British colleagues, were enjoying a trouble-free run, neither Impreza having picked up a single puncture so far. Colin McRae had begun the day behind Peter Solberg, but immediately gained a place when Solberg allowed the works car to start Section 5 ahead of him. 4th place then became 3rd, when McRae caught Oriol on the section.
6 left.
Listen, just keep your patience. There he is.
76 crests and straight 1 kilometre.
Oriol and Denis Giraudet struggled through Section 5 with transmission problems. A little over 7.5 minutes were lost to the charging Scotsman, and so the French pair slipped to 4th on the leaderboard, behind McRae and Welsh co-driver Nicky Grist.
Incurring a 30-second penalty letting McRae past and then being asked by Peugeot to let the closing Gronholm through cost Solberg over 5 minutes and dropped him behind Arai, who now lay an impressive 5th, guided by his experienced English co-driver Roger Freeman. For Freddie Loix, though, the Safari experience once again turned sour. Last year, his promising career was blunted by a massive end-over-end roll, and this year, having never risen higher than 8th, he failed to reach the end of Section 7. Just halfway through the event, and both Mitsubishis were out.
Well, it seems that the rear shock absorber failed. You know, it was on a very, very rough section, and if you've no rear shock absorber, then the rear of the car trails on the ground, and a lot of bedrock in that area, about 60 kilometres to go, so there was no question about what we had to do. We had to retire them on the spot.
With both cars out because of the conditions, would this be a good time to ask you, does the rally have a place in the championship?
It certainly has a place in the championship. You know, the Safari is either very good for you or it's very bad for you. And I'm afraid this year's been very bad for us, but it's a very, very important event in the championship, and I think that they're running their event very close to the new regulations that we have, and they've had to move further than any event. And you know, as it is just now, I think it's certainly acceptable for us, and I'm sure for the rest of the teams.
But even the Subaru team was suddenly finding the Safari Rally can bite at any time. Burns' engine had stopped at the end of section 7 and for a while refused to restart, leaving the team to ponder why.
I would think what he's done is scooped up a load of sand.
Having reached the service, it was all hands to action. Richard took his time for a tasty snack, and the problem was soon diagnosed.
Richard must have stopped after the stage, and the engine heated up, and there's a sensor on the engine which puts it onto a safe map for the computer control effectively. And once that sensor reads a temperature above a limit, it refuses to let the engine restart until it's cooled down. Richard just poured some drinking water over where the sensor is mounted. The temperature came down, and we were all relieved, and he was on his way.
And 20 minutes later, the Subaru left the service right on time.
The last of the day's 4 sections was a partial repeat of the first, but this time the river crossing was a lot more spectacular. Not that that bothered Burns. For McRae, running without a snorkel on the engine air intake, the river would be a very different story. Water had drowned the Focus's engine, and even turning it over without spark plugs didn't seem to help. McRae's rally looked to be over, but the worry now was that Sainz would also fall victim to the river. With Nicky Grist urging caution, Sainz drove through with no hint of any problem, making retirement for Colin a particularly bitter blow.
It wasn't a problem, no, but I don't know who, but the spectators or somebody had dammed the river, and it was slightly deeper, but it shouldn't have been that bad. We were just very unlucky. I mean, the other cars passed on this right-hand side of where we went through, and they get through no problem. We just followed the natural line through it, and it must have obviously been a bit deeper there than it was to the right. I suppose the only thing you can say is Tommy's gone out, so he's not walking away with more points. It's not a disaster by any means, but it would have been obviously very handy to have the 4 points.
But McRae wouldn't be the day's last victim. As Marcus Gronholm had predicted, he'd never looked like repeating his Swedish rally victory. But after having safely negotiated the river, his Peugeot ground to a halt. Co-driver Timo Rautiainen left to explain the problem to their helicopter.
The pedal is blocked. Marcus cannot press the pedal to the bottom.
Clutch pedal or brake pedal?
Clutch pedal, clutch pedal, clutch pedal. The clutch is sliding. We have 4th gear on and the clutch is up.
All those retirements meant that both the Skodas were now in point-scoring positions. Armin Schwartz and co-driver Manfred Heimer would be 7th at the end of leg 2, on course for 2 manufacturers' points. Their teammates Luis Clement and Alex Romani would be 8th overall, but still in line for 1 point, thanks to the fact that there were 2 privateers ahead of them.
Day 2, though, would belong to the charging matador Carlos Sainz. Despite being slowed by power steering problems that bizarrely cured themselves with a dip into the river, the Spaniard was fastest on 3 of the day's 4 sections and was 3.5 minutes quicker than Burns over the whole leg, pulling himself up from 10th to 4th by the end of the day.
Anything can happen in any moment, and always same story with the dust, with the punctures, with people having problems here and there, so it's similar.
The Ford team's young protégé was now back up to 5th, with his co-driver hoping for even better.
What would be a good result for you tomorrow?
If we can get to 4th place, that would be very good.
With the way things are going, top 3 isn't out of the question.
You never know what happens in this event. I mean, you just never know what's around the next corner. So we'll just have to wait and see.
Even the leader wasn't getting overconfident.
You know, there's so many cars doing the rally now, all the manufacturers doing the rally, but everybody seems to think that the pace should step up just because there's more cars. But Safari is still Safari, and you still have to think of it how it's always been. It's fast rally, it's hard on the car, but you can't drive the car into the ground.
Kankkunen had been just 32 seconds slower than Burns over the 225 miles of the day's sections, but Oriol had dropped a full 8 minutes further back.
So Richard Burns begins leg 3 in exactly the same way he began leg 2, but sadly for Colin McRae it's a very different story. His 10th retirement in 11 rallies, but at least he wasn't the only victim of leg 2. 2/3 of the cars which began the rally have now retired. Burns, though, is on the verge of his first victory of the year. All that stand in his way are 4 more competitive sections, but those sections cover some 200 miles. Leg 3, in fact, was an exact repeat of leg 1, but 50 cars had used those roads since the crews had first tackled them. First to check the conditions were Robert Reid and Richard Burns. By now, though, the pair were able to cruise and were over a minute slower than Didier Oriol, who set the fastest time. Kankkunen was 3rd quickest, another 43 seconds slower than Burns, but it didn't matter. The Subaru 1-2 was now a real possibility, and the Finn wasn't taking any chances. Oriol, on the other hand, stormed through the first section, but was still nearly 9 minutes behind Kankkunen with 3 sections remaining. It would take a minor miracle for the Seat to move up the leaderboard. Sainz's threat to Oriol, meanwhile, had evaporated on that section. This puncture, coupled with power steering failure, had cost over 10 minutes and left the Spaniard needing ice packs and physiotherapy at the end of the 70 miles. Sainz's teammate Colin McRae was now riding as an extra pair of eyes in the Spaniard's spotter helicopter and could offer a few words of comfort in Ford's makeshift cafeteria. But from Carlos's co-driver, words of praise, not comfort. It's been described to us as almost superhuman.
I think so. I think only Superman and himself, they can do what he did now. Because, I mean, to drive in these conditions, I saw it, and there is no help I can do, so I could read and I could see, I could feel the pain in my hands as well.
Young Solberg had no such problems with his Focus and was now back up to 4th. Both Skodas were still running strongly, albeit a bit off the pace. Lewis Clement set a confidence-boosting 4th fastest time on the final section though, ending the day just 19 minutes behind his more experienced German teammate. The Czech team would be happy with 7th and 8th overall, plus those 3 manufacturers' points.
Now, the team is new to Africa, you're not. Has your experience helped them?
I think yes. I mean, we had also a good engineer with us, I mean, Mr. Goldstein from Volkswagen. And that helped us a lot, I mean, to get good advices and get these things together. And the team, I mean, is doing a fantastic job. I mean, I have not seen the team before like here.
Toshihiro Arai continued on his stealthy path towards 6th place and won hugely rewarding World Championship point for the Japanese star. Petter Solberg may well have benefited from doing Ford's pre-event testing, yet his solid run to 5th was most impressive, easing off under the eagle eye of Big Brother to allow Sainz back past on the day's final section.
200.
Phil from Martin. Do you think you're going too fast now or not?
Just forget it, Martin. 6 left, 200.
Carlos Sainz, though, was long gone, over 3 minutes clear of Solberg and ending the event just 5.5 minutes shy of a podium finish. And he dropped over 10 minutes with all his dramas on the day's opening section.
I think after I lost so much this morning, Peter, I'm sure he was not going flat out because at the end of the day we have to get the points for the championship.
So, through dramas thick and thin, punctures and shock absorber problems too numerous to count, Didier Oriol brought his Seat home 3rd to match the team's best ever World Championship finish. Mind you, on the Safari, there's always time for one more tyre to go pop.
On a éclaté, il faut qu'on change.
Our problem all the rally was the shock absorber, and when the shock absorber get warm, it don't work very well, and it's the tire take all the stone, and we get the puncture like that. So I have need really to drive be careful in the last stage after 20 kilometers my shock was completely finished, so I really take the decision to drive very, very slow on the rough and very fast when it was very smooth, and we managed luckily.
On the last 31-mile section, Kankkunen and Repo were second quickest, over a minute adrift of Sainz, but it would be enough. Not only was Subaru on the verge of a 1-2, but the first 3 cars were using Pirelli tyres, in sharp contrast to Sweden, where the top 3 were all on Michelin rubber. Richard Burns and Robert Reid could afford to cruise through the final section to take their first win of the year. They'd led since the rally's second section and had dominated the event. The Safari, remember, isn't usually a rally where the word domination gets much use. In the final service area, team manager John Spiller waited anxiously for news.
Perfect performance.
Oh.
Yes.
Yes.
That's
Great job there.
Oh no, it's a great job. Pass it on to Rich and Rob.
Minutes later, the man of the moment arrived, to the applause of his mechanics and the congratulation of his teammate.
Yeah, okay. Thank you.
It's perfect for myself and for the team, obviously, as well, to get 16 points for them. But for me, it puts me back a little bit closer to Tommy. Still not close enough, but and it's a good place to be.
You and Robert made it look easy.
Well, that's the idea. If you've done it right, then it looks easy. But I tell you, there's a lot of work before.
Enjoy the party.
I will. Thanks.
Believe me, it wasn't easy, especially today. You know, knowing that we had a lead and almost defending that lead. In some ways, we could only have lost the rally, but we haven't. So, absolutely delighted.
Sweden, just 2 weeks ago, we were 5th and 6th. This one wasn't very good, and won the 3rd place. So, not very good start. But at the moment, it looks very good. So I think everybody will try as hard they can, and it for sure brings up the whole morale on the team. And we feel free. You know, we know that we can win. So easier to go from this.
Burns' lead of 4.5 minutes over teammate Kankkunen at the end was almost exactly the same as it had been after leg 1, but the Subaru's domination over the rest was a massive 18 minutes. This win lifted Burns from 7th to 2nd in the Drivers' Championship table, with Mäkinen just 4 points clear at the top. In the chase for manufacturers' honours, Subaru's 16-point maximum jumped them from 4th to 1st, but it's still early days.
So, victory number 2 for Richard Burns on the Safari Rally, and the 4th straight win for a British driver. What's more, those championship positions now make very interesting reading. The young Englishman right up there with the 2 Finns. The series next returns to Europe for round 4, the Rally of Portugal, in 3 weeks' time.